Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this, which is our last meeting of the Climate Change and Nature Recovery Service Transformation Committee of this municipal year. I'll start, as always, with any apologies for absence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apology from Councillor Andrew Stevens.
Thank you. And are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest that anybody needs to make? No? Okay, so next it's to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting. I hope everybody's had a chance to have a look at those. This is the meeting where we had two very meaty items, the Regional Transport Plan and the LDP. Any comments? No, moved by Councillor Rice. Anyone happy to second online? Yep, so Councillor Keaton, lovely. And all happy, marvellous. Thank you very much. Okay, so without further ado then, we're moving on to our report on the climate change adaptation and mitigation strategy. So I'm going to hand over to Jane. I know there's a number of parts to this section of our agenda, so I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm going to share some slides that have come to me from the Welsh Government regarding their own adaptation strategy for Wales. So if you just bear with me a moment, I'll just get them up on the screen. Where are we? There we are. Okay, so I hope everybody can see that. So this presentation pack has been produced by the climate change team within Welsh Government, aiming to support local government colleagues and to raise awareness of the climate adaptation strategy for Wales and the consideration of the climate adaptation planning within their own organisations. So the slide pack covers the background information about the implications of our changing climate and extreme weather patterns, the introduction to the recently published National Climate Strategy, and how this relates to the role of local authorities in adapting to the impacts of climate change. So I'm going to just run through them as they've been given to me. They are bilingual, so and I will take as many questions as I can on this. I have had some involvement in the development of it, with the group that I sit on, the local government climate strategy panel for adaptation, but I'm not the expert on these bits. So if there's anything that I can't answer, I will come back to you, if that's all right, on those at another time. So first of all, just to talk about mitigation and adaptation itself. So first, we need to sort of clarify what the distinctions between each are. So mitigation, decarbonisation, net zero, that sort of thing. So the first part is the mitigation, and that's to limit the extent of global warming through carbon emissions reduction and sequestration. So that's a lot of the 2030 work that we're doing as a public body and that other public bodies are expected to do, and potentially a lot of the asks that we may have of businesses and individuals and residents, you know, just to limit their carbon emissions. But adaptation as an opposite to that is actually adjusting to the actual and expected effects of climate change. So that is making sure that we are resilient for the future. This next slide, the chart there is actually taken from the Climate Change Committee's average global temperature projections under different decarbonisation scenarios. I can give everybody all the links to all these documents afterwards if you'd like to have a look at these in any great detail, but they are all available online. The green there is if we are successful in meeting our emissions. So we've got a really long way to go already to reach our emissions targets that have been set in line with the UN Paris Agreement. And the yellow is the trajectory that we are currently on based on the global ambition and policy that is here at the moment. So those are for the commitments that we've already made. So you can see that we're actually quite significantly needing to sort of reduce that yellow down to meet the green. So we have a really, really long way to go on all our policy, and really set some ambitious targets if we have any chance of reaching that UN agreement. The two main points really here are to highlight that further global warming will continue to at least 2050, just with what's already locked in. So, you know, we've got stuff that's already there, that's already happening, and that we need to make sure that we we need to limit what happens now to ensure that we don't go too much further beyond what we're expecting for 2050. We're also, you know, it's almost regardless of the trajectory we are on, we'll end up, we need to work to decarbonise, whichever one it is, just to try and limit the effects. We don't know what the trajectory will end up on. Certainly, uncertainty increases beyond 2050, excuse me, and will depend very much on, sorry, it's just not moving. Will depend on global decarbonisation, not just what's happening here in Wales and the UK. So even as we work to limit further global warming through decarbonisation, some climate change is already with us and will set to continue, and we need to adapt. The Paris Agreement aims to limit the increase of global average temperature to well below 2 degrees. Above pre-industrial levels to pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5. So we're setting that as our main aim. But you may already know that there is some uncertainty about how have we reached that because of the El Nino effect that we've had, and how quickly it may go back down to what it was before the El Nino in the last couple of years, or whether it's actually going to stay as it is. So have we actually reached 1.5 already? That is still being looked at as well. So, you know, we're in quite a serious position, but there's still an awful lot that we can do. These two graphs, you know, they're obviously the same graph, but in Welsh and English, and it comes straight from the strategy itself. So, you know, relatively small sounding changes of 1.5 degrees of global average temperature can lead to profound changes in our climate and weather patterns. So, you know, we are already seeing even more significant changes to temperature just due to temperature extremes. In the UK, we can expect the following changes to continue to develop over the next few years. So increase in a very hot days and heat waves could near doubling even on a low emissions scenario. Less frequent icy days, so those days that we have at 0 degrees or below, we can expect them to be less frequent. We might not necessarily consider that as we've just had a cold spell, but this is the average across, and it's the averages that really count, not the little anomalies. And the increase in heavy rainfall events, increasing the risk of flooding at all times of year. And we've seen that there's been some significant flooding here already in Swansea. And, you know, we need to be thinking about our infrastructure. We need to be thinking about how we have our service delivery. And it's not just us as a public body, but also, you know, the fire brigade and the health service, etc., are all looking at this and how their service deliveries are going to be affected. And, you know, the increased periods of low rainfall and drought in the summer, and how that might affect our crops and that sort of thing as well. So we need to be thinking about all of this and setting this as sort of the background to what we're trying to accomplish. So you can see, you know, there's this here about sea level rise and coastal erosion. You know, warming sea level rises, sea level rise, possibly up to a metre by the year 2100 in higher global warming scenarios. That's going to be really, really significant. We are a coastal county on 3 sides. That's going to have a significant effect on what we are doing here and what we need to think about here in Swansea. And of course, that's all going to be exacerbated by the storm surges that we've seen across South Wales and our areas. I mean, obviously, this is a significant issue for a lot of coastline in Wales, and Fairborn, for instance, in Gwynedd, now has a managed retreat. So, you know, we want to make sure that we are in a good position for the future here in Swansea. Also, with more extreme storms, we can expect to have that more regularly. There is potential an awful lot of damage to property and potential danger to life with that as well. So we need to be thinking about that. So this brings me on to looking at cross-cutting implications for the resilience of people's lives and livelihoods and the with health and well-being of our communities. And we've in the UK, the Climate Change Committee has a statutory role advising government. This includes providing advice on the evidence for risks, impacts and opportunities arising from climate change. I think it's really important to say opportunities because I also think that, you know, this is such a depressing subject. We've got to have some hope. And when I come to talk about what we've been doing here in Swansea, we really have been trying to look at opportunities and frame it in that way. The latest 5-yearly UK climate change independent assessment was published in 2021, and the next one is due in 2026. And the local government climate strategy panel for adaptation has been looking at this to help feed into that process at the moment. The Welsh Government also commissioned the Climate Change Committee to undertake a progress report on climate adaptation in Wales, which was published in 2023. The key messages from that were climate-related risks are increasing significantly in some areas. Adaptation has not been keeping pace in all parts of the UK. And hence the Welsh Government wanted to review and update the strategic approach to climate adaptation in Wales, reflected in the new National Adaptation Strategy that was published in October 2024. In the climate change risk assessment, there are 61 risks altogether identified for Wales, 18 identified as key risks to consider. This diagram here is taken from the strategy. So the new adaptation strategy comprises of a main document setting out the overall strategic approach and an annex containing 15 system-based adaptation action plans setting out what does good look like for each system, the resilience outcomes that we are aiming to achieve, and the actions being taken by Welsh Government across sectors, recognising that there are interdependencies between sectors. Then there's also the asks of others, recognising the roles and needs for the public sector delivery partners and stakeholders, including the public and UK government. And the 15 systems are aligned with the Climate Change Committee's adaptation monitoring framework, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I come into talking about Swansea. The approach recognises cross-cutting issues and interdependencies such as social justice and decarbonisation. The new monitoring framework is also being developed, due to be published later this year in 2025. So Welsh Government is working on their own, but we're working with the Climate Change Committee's one as it is at the moment, and we're not actually anticipating that there's going to be any significant changes. Maybe just a little bit more detail that might be applicable more to Wales than the rest of the United Kingdom. And that brings me on to these 15 adaptation action plans. So you can see there that there are 15. In the original Climate Change Committee's monitoring framework, there are 13. But basically what Wales has done is it has split nature into agriculture and forestry and woodland as well. So they've split some of them up rather than just having them as is from the Climate Change Committee's a monitoring framework. And the reasoning behind that was because there was felt that there's certain particulars of agriculture here in Wales that need to be addressed, but also that forestry and woodland are a big can and have been and are a big part of Wales and what Wales has to offer for tourism, but also for timber and other sort of things as well. So it's all recognising all of that. All the plans are cross-sector plans, bringing together relevant actions from different sectors to deliver climate resilience. And the monitoring maps have been produced by the Climate Change Committee to help us look at each of those systems in a little bit more detail. So if you look at the Climate Change Committee's adaptation and monitoring framework online at the moment, you can actually click on these individual maps and it will take you through things that you may need to look at, and are there these policies, have a look at this and refer to this one over that one and stuff like that. So there's a lot of work that's already been done and a lot of background that is really helpful for us here in Swansea. And I think having this Welsh strategy has really helped us to sort of galvanise our thoughts on things. So the Welsh Government has recognised that whilst the publication of the strategy is a positive step forward, there is still more to be done, and commitments are made to this effect within the strategy. So the next steps by the Welsh Government at the strategic level will include governance, so internal arrangements within the Welsh Government and setting up of a policy futures forum, and for engagement with external experts and collaboration across the UK. And then the monitoring framework, which is due to be published here in the summer, which is specific to Wales. And then the delivery, the Welsh Government strategic commitments and action plans will look at how the Welsh Government looks at how it's going to be delivering on this, and then the engagement and collaboration with the public sector and partners and stakeholders. But public engagement via Climate Action Wales programme is vitally important in the way that the Welsh Government is engaging with the public generally across Wales. And you may have seen some of those adverts on the television, and there's certainly a lot of things online. Here in Swansea, we've taken those resources and had permissions already to have them Swansea-fied, if you like. And so we've used slightly different imaging on some of them, but we've used different statistics as well, which is very much related to Swansea. And we've done this already under the Do the Little Things banner. And that was launched on St David's Day this year. And if you go to some of the car parks around Swansea now, you'll see some of the wraps around the car park pillars. We've picked very simple actions that the public can do here in Swansea to help towards this agenda. We've put that together with all the logos for Swansea Project Zero, just to try and really get that galvanised sort of action going on. And we have a website now as well. So community groups that might want to use those resources can contact me, and they can have them for nothing and put their own logos on them as well, as long as they sign some agreement with us. So we're just trying to get those messages out there as much as possible, but we're being quite successful with that at the moment, I think, here in Swansea. Then there's the social justice side of things, research and embedding into policy development, and the Just Transition is coming out in April from the Welsh Government. So we're here in Swansea waiting for that to help us with the final pulling together of the adaptation and mitigation strategy here. Obviously, finance and economics are a big thing, and the Welsh Government is looking at the moment for innovative finance models for adaptation. And I've been on a few webinars. There's been some very interesting ways that people are suggesting that we might do some of that financing in the future. But a lot of that is at very early stages. And again, they want place-based pilots exploring whole systems area-based approaches. And we've taken this approach here in Swansea. We've done a very much a place-based approach to the development of our strategy, which I will come on to shortly. I've almost finished on this. Okay, so climate change is already affecting the public sector, its assets and service delivery, and the risks are increasing. So local government has a key role to play, and there are a number of asks within the strategy. And it has a key role in delivering climate resilience and helping communities to be resilient too. The content of section 4.3 of the strategy was provided by the WLGA working with the Climate Strategy Panel for Adaptation, the task and finish group that I've been on. So that's been very much part of that. And it presents the current position from a local government perspective of the key actions being taken by local government. And I will say that having done some work on this with other authorities across Wales, we're not miles ahead of people, but we are ahead in some aspects. We are thinking about things ahead of some authorities who haven't even managed to get round to be thinking about some of the basics yet. So we are doing quite well, I think. But I think that, you know, we shouldn't be sitting back. And then section 5 of the strategy sets out the 15 system adaptation action plans. So each action plan includes the asks of the public sector, recognising the importance of the role of the local authorities and other public bodies in delivering climate change adaptation. And we've used the original 13 areas from the climate change monitoring framework, but will now align with the 15 areas as per Welsh Government by splitting out the agriculture and the forestry and woodland, which, as you know, forestry and woodland isn't going to be a great big part of the Swansea Gower actions. So just going on, there's a need to embed climate adaptation into all our decision making and to assess and address climate related risks to local government assets and service delivery. Many local authorities are already taking action to address some significant areas of risk. However, this slide illustrates some of the things we should be thinking about and shows some cross-cutting nature and breadth of risk arising from climate change that we all need to consider. The cost of taking preventative climate adaptation action is often lower than the cost of responding to climate-related impacts. And there are a number of published sources of information, toolkits and guidance available to help organisations understand this. And I know that the Welsh Government are trying to put more meat on the bones, if you like, of what cost it would be if we didn't do things related to what if we do. So, which they hope to sort of firm up a bit more, you know, as time goes on. And then these are some of the examples that have been taken out of the asks for the public sector. So assess key climate related risks in service areas, include climate change in corporate risk registers, build climate change resilience actions into business and financial planning and strategic development plans, consider risk to supply chains and cascading risks, so events that impact transport, energy supply, ICT, etc., and understand the impacts of vulnerable groups in your community. Engaging with communities and local stakeholders on risks and action plans. And I think we've done a really good start on that here in Swansea, which I'll talk about in a moment, and consider skills development needs and training for local government officers to make sure that they can deliver as required. So that is that takes me to the end of that's come from the Welsh Government at the moment, and it's the aim is to support, as I said, local government and stakeholders in producing their own adaptation and mitigation action plans. Okay.
Thank you. We'll let Jane have a breather for a moment. That was really, really helpful context, setting the national picture for what we're going to discuss now, which is obviously Swansea's local plan. Are there any questions or comments on what we've just heard before we dive in? Stunned us into silence, Jane. Okay, great. That's really, really helpful. The link is there as well, isn't it? So if people want to go and dive into that strategy in more detail, they're obviously very welcome to. If there aren't any questions, then I will hand back over to you, Jane, to take us through the next section.
Okay. Mic on, sorry. So this has been very much a large piece of work that I've been doing over the last few years. So the Climate Charter Signatories Group, which was set up after declaring the climate and nature emergencies, was asked by Public Service Board in 2023 to take on the Adaptation and Mitigation Strategy and Action Plan for the county. So I secured some funding through the Shared Prosperity Fund, and we started on this piece of work to sort of think about how we wanted to develop it and everything else. And I will say, we had already started doing some of this before I was invited onto the climate strategy panel. So, but it's all worked out very well, which is quite good. So I'm quite pleased about that. So out of the signatories members, it was myself, Hayley Baharrell from Swansea Bay University Health Board, and Coy Merribark from UWTSD that took on the main part of the bulk of this work. We did quite a lot of desktop research, and the aims and objectives we came up with, I think we tried to make sure that we were reflecting Swansea as a place. So the main aim was to provide a just and equitable transition for all citizens in Swansea in response to climate change, delivering healthy and sustainable communities through placemaking to ensure a livable future with a nature-rich environment and well-being for all at its heart. We felt that would sort of be reasonably all-encompassing. And then the objectives were to pull together the evidence, which would be through a technical report, which identifies key priorities. And most of this report is about that. Identifying co-benefits to maximise social, economic and environmental impacts. Making sure that we highlight key stakeholders and demonstrate how nature-based solutions can support this work. Understand future opportunities that are unique to Swansea. As I said in the previous presentation, we felt that it was really vitally important to have put some sort of positive spin on this, because we do not want to disempower people. I really do strongly feel that a lot of environmental engagement, particularly with climate change, has always started from such a negative way with people, and that's why we're in a position where so many people do not want to know, because they feel so disempowered. So we really did want to make sure that we were positive about this. We want to understand the cost of not mitigating and adapting, as I was saying, within what the Welsh Government is doing. So we're waiting for that piece of work from them to help us with that, and understand aspects of climate adaptation and mitigation that are going to be managed elsewhere, which is not our responsibility here in Swansea. So we've looked at a lot of reports, we've looked at a lot of frameworks, and we decided that we wanted to use the evidence from the climate change risk assessments, and that the adaptation monitoring framework from the Climate Change Committee were two really key documents that we wanted to make sure that we aligned with. And as I say, then when I joined the climate strategy panel just before the and had input into the Welsh Government strategy, I was glad that we'd taken that approach. And so that was all well and good. So we procured some consultants, and we had 12 agencies from across the UK. In the end, we went with Jeremy Benn Associates in collaboration with Grasshopper Communications, and Grasshopper are those communications of the consultants that work with Welsh Government on the Climate Action Wales. So they were very familiar with a lot of this sort of work. We worked then with the consultants to develop online workshops for officers from partner organisations, and we had something like 80 officers from across different organisations partaking in 2 online workshops. So we had people such as we had pharmacists, and we had surgeons, and we had waste teams and all sorts. So we had quite cross-section, and we had some really good input from those. We did some PSB workshops as well, one face-to-face, and we also did 12 workshops across the community, and we did them in September. We were originally hoping to get them done in July, but because of the election, we had to postpone till September. So the technical report is actually being finished off at the moment. But it is basically the evidence that we have gained so far from all the work that we've done. So all the consultation that we've done, all the research, scientific papers, etc., and all the evidence that there is out there that we can find at the moment to bring together so that we can actually write this strategy. So this is about what we've managed to do for this so far. So the methodology that we used was to make sure that we were in line. We laid out, we used the climate adaptation monitoring framework because it actually laid out very clear guidance for us. And, we had to think about a vision, and we had to think about integrating adaptation into other policies. So we also did another piece of work alongside this with the signatories, looking at what our existing policies and strategies are across our different organisations, so that we can actually look to see where the gaps are, etc., at the same time. We have been asked to look to at what a 2-degree rise and a 4-degree rise would look like here in Swansea, which I think is quite a shocking thing to actually think about having to look at. But I think it is good to know what we may or may not have in store. So we've been looking at that as well. We decided to take the bottom-up approach rather than actually come up with something ourselves, first of all, from just the literature that we had looked at and the scientific research, etc. We decided that we also just wanted to get out there and talk to the people of Swansea about their own experience and what they wanted to see in their own communities. There's been a very different approach taken by us than others that are sort of going on trying to do something similar. I think it's paid off in a number of ways. So, we've had some really good officer representation. So we've had some real insights into their areas of work and where they feel we have weaknesses or need to consider things across the board, or where the health board does, etc. But also just from the people of Swansea, we didn't have a huge engagement. There was a lot of issues, I think, with engaging with the community at this stage. I think there were some people wanting us to have something that they could just comment on. But But I will say generally that when they realised that we actually were just asking them straight up, they were delighted that they were actually able to have that say at that stage. I had an awful lot of really positive feedback from people after these events. They were really hard work. They went over two or 3 weeks in September. We were doing, one in the afternoon and then one in an evening or whatever, to try and cover as much as we possibly could. We used the areas, the thematic areas of adaptation to look at. So we looked at nature, working land and sea, food security, water supply, etc., and just got them to think about it and got them to think about it in their own context. We didn't have, as I said, a huge number of people on this first round. We do want to go out, which I will talk to you about in a moment. But I will say that we really did try to make sure that we had no bias. And largely, I would say, we were reasonably successful. We did have a number of representations from the same environmental group across a lot of the workshops, but we ended up being able to handle that quite well, I think. I also think that by the fact that we didn't go out by some of the established channels, we managed to actually capture people that had never, ever taken part in anything like this before. One of them that springs to mind was Gowerton, and a lady turned up, and it was a really filthy night outside, and she turned up and she'd come to her nearest one. She was from Unarloith. And she came in and she was sort of, I'm going to have grandchildren soon. I need to be thinking about this, and she'd never taken part in any public consultation. She'd never done anything. The only thing that she said that she always did for her community was she did something with the WI. But she felt that she was really needed to say something and put her thing forward. And she had such amazing ideas that different things to put forward, which we were really, really pleased about. So even though we didn't have huge numbers, we had some really valuable conversations, and I think we came up with some really interesting things. We developed the resources ourselves with the help of Grasshopper, and they were produced in English and Welsh, and I think I put them in the back, some of the things that we used. And they were just basically conversation starters, just to help get people to think about things. And they worked really, really well. And there's been an awful lot of interest from other authorities across Wales to help use those resources. So I think that they will be seen again in other guises across Wales. And I think it's great that we were able to share that. And then I've included in here then some of the findings from some of the workshops. So this is the first, a draft of the report. This is taken from one of the drafts of the report, not the final one, which obviously I will share with you when it's finally done. But I just felt that this was a good sort of snapshot of some of the things that were looked at. Some of it might not be a surprise, but the thing that I found most inspiring about all of this was the willingness of the people of Swansea to actually get involved and to do something. And one of the things that we are looking at is something called community preparedness and response. And the community wants to be prepared and they want to be able to respond, but they want to be able to respond positively. And I think that will be one of the main things that we'll be looking at, how we can guide them to do that, to make sure that they have that positive response, because there's that whole thing about risk, and if the way that you respond, whether it exacerbates the risk or whether it helps to lighten that risk, so it's about that response. So the final report should be with us next Monday. And then what the PSB have commented on it already, and so have the signatories. So the final version hopefully will be with us on Monday. It is then my intention that myself, Hayley and Coy, we will be the writing team for the main strategy, as we have been living and breathing this for the last 18 months. So we will write the strategy, we will pull together the actions from the findings from the workshops. And we're going to set it out in exactly the same way that the Welsh Government have set out theirs. So we'll look at what the Welsh Government, UK Government say that they are going to deliver. We'll look at the public sector and the partners, so that'd be the climate signatories group, what we can deliver as strategic partners. Then we'll look at business and what business can do here in Swansea, and we'll look at community and what community can do in Swansea. Then I've just put in for another bid with Shared Prosperity. If I'm successful, it is the intention that we will go back out and we will do some consultation with business and community again in September to say to them, this is what we've got. Do you agree? What sort of support do you need? And that sort of thing, so that we can actually put some real substance behind it and have it all ready before November next year, or this year, sorry. yeah, because it is this year now. Anyway, thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jane. That's such a massive piece of work that you've done, and I'm gutted in a way that a lot of it's happened while I was on my maternity leave, but great to see some of the results. I've got a couple of comments and questions myself, but as I always do, I'll open up to the committee first. So is there anybody who wanted to speak? So Councillor Rice, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to Jane for taking us through the work that she's done and the work that's planned by the Welsh Government as well. I don't think it'd be too dramatic to say that we are facing the biggest flooding risks in the Swansea area since the 1600s, when people lost bits of Swansea to the sea. And I say, rather than the sea being, even though there's a risk there, there's a tremendous risk in looking at the way in which flooding can happen through the river system and the estuaries and the floodplains that we have around Swansea. And what I think is a key thing for us to look at in terms of mitigation is we are now facing the next few months going through the local development plan. And it's one of the tools in the toolkit that we can use to make sure that the local development plan helps us against some of these issues. So what I would be looking for is ways in which we don't build entirely on riparian areas and floodplains and natural areas where we would be able to mitigate against flood risk. The other area as well is that I think we need to look to where we can slow down some of our rivers. So when we have those immediate sort of flash flood situations and runoff situations that we have have got areas within the city and county that can hold water. And I think that's quite an important thing for us to consider. There are threats from the sea, and it's good to see that the Mumbles West Cross kind of area is being dealt with at the moment. And you just need to walk out of here and go across the road to see the level that the floods came. I think it was 100 or so years ago across here, and there used to be more floods in the Sandfields area. So we do definitely need to deal with that. I think the next thing really is in any mitigation and adaptation that we do forward, but probably more mitigation. So when we have a plan, that we don't have a plan that contradicts itself by one action to another. So what I mean by that is it's great to look at transportation, cycling, for instance, or something like that. Then in putting in a cycling plan to try and get people to cycle, that we take away a lot of tree cover. I mean, there's one that springs straight to mind very recently that's happened, where we've taken over 100 trees out. I mean, there may be issues and things. I'm not an expert in that area, but I just think make sure there's connectivity between the different aims that we're trying to achieve. And the other things that we really need to look at is how, as you said, we engage business and other organisations. And I think it's great that the council has gone about the idea of a signatures group and the signature charter. And one of the greatest ways of engaging people is the way that's been intended so far as if you go for any funding within the council, it asks you, have you signed up to the charter? So it has a number of commitments. And I think that's good, because if you're going to put resources into something, it's worth putting resources into something where people have a shared principles and ideas. And it'd be interesting to see how going forward, I suppose, James, we can use the wider signatures group because there are lots of different people. I know that, you know, people around who've signed it, from be it a small business to a local community group. It's good to have a coordinating group as you've got at the moment. It's how can we communicate to the other signatures as well, because there are things that, as you said, going forward that they can help us to do. And I do think as well, you know, in terms of climate adaptation, which is the second part, it'd be interesting to see what we can do, because it's very much linked into nature recovery as well, what we can do with replanting, especially after severe storms and things like that. What are the best array of trees, plants, understory, things that we can put in place, and where can we have the opportunity to do that? And the other thing as well is that, you know, when you look back at the LDP, there is one of the best ways of trying to have a contribution in Swansea towards climate change is to recycle, reuse and reduce. And you do that with your buildings first. So if there are lots of grey buildings, like the Civic Centre, like other places, let's get them built in or used for development before we put anything up on the green side of the thing. So grey is always best, brown is second, and then green, we shouldn't even be talking about it until we've got everything else sorted or built on first. But yeah, sorry for sort of lots of points, but it's great to see this work happening. And I just think, you know, as long as a council, we keep focused on not contradicting by one action in one corner against another corner, and that would be quite good.
I'll just add a slightly different angle to what Councillor Rice has said, because this issue of contradicting actions is a really big one, isn't it, with an organisation the size of a council, where we've got different different functions, different, you know, objectives, different statutory duties in some cases that are sometimes you know, rub up against each other, don't they? I just think it's about always making sure that we're mindful of the climate impact, and that where something is completely unavoidable, or actually there are very good reasons for why we might not take a certain course of action, that something else over here is sort of put in place. So I think it might be we might end up tying ourselves up in knots if every single decision is looked at in isolation, but actually it's about taking a whole sort of the network pattern approach, isn't it? So yeah, I would just add to that. Is there anything you wanted to come back on, Jane, in terms of what Councillor Rice just said there?
I can do. I mean, I've just written down here, obviously aligning with policies and strategies. We've started that piece of work, as I said. You know, we've been looking at our policies and strategies with the health board, etc., as well, just to see if we've got anything, to see if there are any gaps, or if there's going to be any real big clashes. The intention would be that if we do see that there's anything, that we actually do, you know, we talk about it to somebody, and we don't put it into our strategy unless we've talked about it, or we you know, we may ask that we review a strategy with somebody again. You know, it could be anything. I don't know. I think that will have to be decided as to whether I should do that. But that was something that we have all thought about as members, and how we want to make sure that nothing doesn't align. But we don't want alignment to also mean weakness either. Yeah. So we've got that. As far as the governance is concerned of the charter signatories, we're looking at that at the moment and reviewing that. So, you know, it would be good to, and with the website that we've got now, we are hoping that we will get much more engagement with people, with the whole idea that they can share some of our resources, that they can keep up with what we're doing, they can feed into that sort of thing. So that's very much part of all of that sort of continued engagement. And I've just put an, I don't know whether I should put this or say this, but I put IAA, yeah, and whether, you know, climate should be included in that way. Sticking my neck out.
People who were on a committee with me when I was first elected will know that I could wax lyrical about the integrated impact assessment process. We don't want to grow it into a tool that's trying to do too much at once, but at the same time, you know, where you've covered in both your presentations that there's specific impacts on vulnerable groups that would be covered in a equalities impact assessment. So potentially, you know, that they should speak to each other, shouldn't they, that these issues. Councillor Keaton, you have your hand up. Over to you.
Hi, Chair. With all these trees that were cut down, I take it that there were trees replanted, if not nearby, but somewhere to make up for the fact that all these trees were cut down to make a cycle path.
I suspect that this is a question for Councillor Stevens, who's not online, but Councillor Lewis has helpfully just put her hand up. Are you able to come in there?
Yeah, I hopefully I can help. My understanding is when we have to remove a tree, we replace it with 3.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Are there any other committee members wishing to speak? Yeah, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, it's just to say thank you for all your hard work, and it's really refreshing to see a bottom-up approach where people are actually part of the consultation before a decision is made. I think it's very refreshing, and I would love to see it more often.
That was a brilliant segue, Councillor Evans, into one of my points, which was going to be about how impressive I find the engagement approach. As somebody who's kind of worked in community engagement for a number of years, it's really, really hard work. And if you don't take into consideration at the beginning how much work it's going to be, you are doomed to fail before you've even started. But you've clearly put in the time and the hard graft to reach people. I think you're right not to be too disheartened by the number of people that you had walk through the door if you did manage to reach people that haven't previously engaged with us on this issue. I think that's really powerful. I did want to ask whether there was any particular approach taken or how you managed to reach young people, just being mindful of the school strikes, and I'm conscious that it seems to have lost a bit of volume, and I worry that young people, for some of them it will have been the first major political issue they kind of got active on, and as you're right to point out that a lot of this is very depressing, isn't it? And I'd hate for them to just feel like, oh, that was a bit of a waste of time, I'm not going to engage in anything in the future. So yeah, if you're able to comment on how we've so far managed to reach young people and plans for the future.
Okay, so originally we had engaged with the YMCA to help us with getting young people together for some workshops, but obviously with the election then called, that was scuppered and we couldn't get another date in the September, because obviously September is a really busy time for this. So what we did is I went to World Children's Day and I spoke to a lot of the children that were at World Children's Day and got them to comment on a lot of things. So we've got that. That's the next bit that's got to go into the technical report. And I also went to the Green Economy Conference and talked to lots of businesses as well. So we had some businesses in the workshops, but we tried to sort of up those numbers when we realised that things like that were low. We would like to do some more with youth this next time round. And I think the thing is because we know we're going to do it in September, if I can get it into into a school calendar or something, a school events thing fairly soon, then maybe we could do that. But it'd be quite nice to maybe tie it up with something else and another event that might be going on with the schools so that we can come along and just chat to them about it there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm reassured by that, because I think it's such an important, ultimately these are the people who are going to be living through whatever it is that we put in place. So it's super important that we're engaging them. If I can come back to drainage, which Councillor Rice has kind of already touched on flooding. It seems to me that in Swansea at the moment, it is the thing that as councillors we are getting, it's just absolutely in my inbox every day, it feels like. And part of it is the age of the infrastructure. And then part of it beyond my understanding, but it seems to be kind of historic decisions about the way that infrastructure was built in the first place that is causing major problems. But I also think, and you've kind of covered it in some of the summary of potential responses, is around a lack of public understanding of how water flows. And people not realising the huge impact that they're having just by paving over their driveway. The number of people who come to me and ask us to concrete over a grass verge because it keeps getting churned up because you know, they're parking over it. And this is where I say, like, taking each decision in isolation, we're going to tie ourselves up in knots. But there are other options, aren't there? You know, things like grasscrete, is it called, where, you know, you can have a harder surface that grass can still grow through and things like that. But I guess it's more of a point than a question. Is just kind of, I personally feel that's so important for people to understand the impact they can make, and to be you know, adequately educated on how to do the opposite. So I've got a bit of garden space where I am that gets very boggy. I have no idea what will grow there, but clearly something should grow there and suck up some of that water. And I think at one point Welsh Water were offering free water butts, and I didn't actually see it advertised. I've just kind of heard a whisper of that happening, you know, since it's already completed. So I just think that's just such an essential, you know, thing for us to be able to kind of, yeah, drive forward. And then my last point, I will come to you, Councillor Baker, was just on, I didn't want to raise it after your Welsh Government presentation, but I guess it kind of flows from that really, is the financing side of things. And I won't do you the disservice of asking you a question on it because I know it's not something that you have an easy answer to. But the fact that you're having to apply for grant funding to even be able to do the work to write the strategy is just horrendous. And I thank you for all the work that you're doing to secure that funding because it's so essential for Swansea and for the people of Swansea. But yeah, it seems to me that it's still very precarious funding situation, and I guess it's a comment for Welsh Government, isn't it, that if they want to see that strategy implemented, the finance question is a huge one that they have really got to sort out very, very soon. So yeah, I'll just make that comment really because I know. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. As far as things, just coming back on first of all on the drainage side of things, one of the things that we're doing, and we've started work on this already, just because there's been quite an ask for it, and that is on an aspect of the work called community preparedness and response. And I went to Councillor Keaton will know that I went to Mumbles a little while ago and spoke to Mumbles Community Council on this. And one of the things that I used in that consultation was maps that are online and are available, but obviously it's knowing about them, isn't it? And about surface water flooding and groundwater, and how, you know, if you've got a high water table and then, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And I explained to the community councillors that were there how that was affecting some of the areas that they were particularly concerned with. I think talking about then going back to aligning with other policies and strategies, I think we're going to align very, very naturally with the GI strategy. I think there's so much that we can do with the nature-based solutions approach, and you know, just even small rain gardens just to help hold some water. But there's also just some very simple things that people can do during heavy rainstorms that they don't even think about, you know, like don't put a load of washing on. So, you know, and that sort of thing, because you've got huge amounts of water going through a system that don't need to, where your drain is then actually having to cope with that. So I'm actually in the process of using something that's already been written. So I'm not going to take you know, credit for the whole thing. But Gwynedd Council has given me their community toolkit, and I've been actually writing more to it, adding much more to it, putting it in a Swansea context. And I'm hoping to get that up online and get community councils and councillors to start getting it out there. So there's going to be lots of little actions that communities can do that I would like that to be sort of pushed out into communities.
Well, I had no idea that you shouldn't put your laundry on when there's a storm coming. So there we are. Every day's a school day, isn't it? Councillor Baker, over to you.
Hi, we're on about drainage. Old culverts. I get a lot of complaints about the old culverts around here. We get a lot of during the winter, late spring, come the summer, then they dry. Old cesspits on the borders of Penderry. We got some private old cottages, and they're on cesspits. Some are on the old type cesspit, which they pay every so often to get them empty. Some are on these new type of composting cesspits. The people that are living up there on the old type cesspit don't know about the composting cesspits they can invest in. Nothing, like they said to me, they don't have nothing on the green infrastructure about flooding or anything. We were up there not long back on a site visit due to flooding, and we're not sure whether it's from some sort of cesspit or whether the blockage is from an old drain. It's ongoing, that is, but it would be interested if we could get some information out to the tenants that are not on the mains for cesspits, and to know that there are cesspits where you can recycle for the composting, which is, I think, is cheaper for them in the long run then.
I think that it will obviously very much depend, as I'm sure you're aware, on whether it's a tenanted property or a private owned property and that sort of thing. As far as my understanding is concerned, as far as cesspits, which is, I will say, is limited, is to do with where something is in a water table and to whether something is actually appropriate. The different types of cesspits are appropriate, but I think that's possibly a highways issue. So maybe we need to raise that with highways to have a look at that as an issue. So I can do that if you like, is to raise that as an issue and ask them to speak to you, if that's all right.
Thanks, Jane. I was just wondering, as we've got Councillor Lewis on the call as well, perhaps linking with housing on that one as well, if there, if there are, if there is council stock that affects. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions or comments from committee members? I'm not seeing any. So next steps for this then are that, so you'll have the full technical report, and then we're hoping to bring it back when you've done some of that work on kind of, go on.
I'd like to bring back the strategy and the action plan once we've got something there, and also I'm looking for support when we do, if we get the funding and we are able to go back out to workshops. I will be asking members if they would help with recruiting more people to come and speak to us for those workshops.
There we are, clear ask from committee members, and I'm seeing nods around the room and virtually. So I think you have our commitment that we will do that. Thank you ever so much, Jane, for that work and for lengthy presentation. Very much appreciated. And I think committee should take, great assurance and also pride in the fact that, as you mentioned, in some areas Swansea's ahead. So although it can all feel a bit doom and gloom, there is some good news there. So thank you ever so much. Lovely. So we'll move on now to the next item on our agenda, which is, can't believe it, the annual report. We've got through another year. This is presented for information, but if there are any comments from committee members about anything else to highlight or add, then I will take them now. I will just say out loud what is in the second paragraph there, which is to put on record my thanks to both Councillor Lawson for stepping into the role of chair during my maternity leave and Councillor Jones for covering the vice chair, and to the myriad of officers that we've had come and present on different topics across the year, because I know it's a lot of work to get those reports together and even to get the work plan together. So thank you to everybody involved. I'm not seeing anybody indicating to speak on that, so I will take it that you are content with the annual report. So that will go forward now to be considered at council, isn't it? It gets looked at. Yeah. Lovely. Right. So the last item is the work plan, which is to say, tick, 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 complete. Well done. And we'll be looking then to set the agenda for the next municipal year at the first meeting of the new committee. So, maybe similar, maybe different membership. So get your thinking caps on for any ideas that we want to cover next year. And with that, I will say thank you ever so much and enjoy the sunshine. And we'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.